Welcome to Presentation Experts Webinar Wednesday. My name is Sharon Fitzpatrick, and I'm your co-host for today's webinar, Professional Graphic Secrets for Non-Designers with Mike Parkinson. Great slides increase attention, retention, and success. So I hope that you will watch as Mike Parkinson from Billion Dollar Graphics transforms ho-hum real-world slides into slides you'll never forget using the techniques he will teach us in today's webinar. You will learn how to make professional graphics fast, validate the success of your slides before you even make them, understand when and how to use logos, bullets, icons, symbols, pictures, animations, and graphics. And you'll get slide making techniques that will save you time and money. And I think that's kind of really the point of what we're trying to do today, is give all of you the knowledge to make your PowerPoints more successful. So we also want to make sure that you are a participant. Be interactive, ask questions, make comments. We'll share as many of the questions and comments as we can during the webinar. Today's webinar is part of the Expert Thinking program, which offers a robust peer-to-peer community for presentation professionals to share ideas, resources, and start discussions. In addition, Webinar Wednesdays, which is what we're doing today, offer engaging conversations with presenters such as Rick Altman, Lisa B. Marshall, Ellen Finkelstein, and Mike Parkinson. Today's speaker, Mike Parkinson of Billion Dollar Graphics, brings a wealth of experience and talent to today's webinar. He really understands the power of graphics. You'll see him transform simple PowerPoint graphics into powerful visuals that make a statement. Mike has authored several books on presentation graphics and created several resources that any of us can use to enhance any PowerPoint presentation. Attendees will get the following tools: a graphics cheat sheet, a slide success checklist, and the top 12 free and low-cost websites for graphics. Before we start today, I wanted to take the opportunity to poll the audience so we can better understand more about what your primary presentation tool is. So let me launch that, and we'll then tell you what the results are, and then we'll start the presentation with Mike. The poll is open. PowerPoint clearly seems to be the winner. We've got 97% of you who use PowerPoint. We do have some of you that also use Keynote, Prezi, and other solutions. So we know that there are a lot of options for you today as some of the things that Mike's going to talk about. So at this time, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Mike. Mike, it's all yours.
Thank you, Sharon. Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here today. As Sharon mentioned, after this seminar, you will, number one, know how to make professional graphics. Number two, and no design skills needed. No design skills needed. Number two is you will have free tools that help you create graphics fast. And number three is you'll know websites that revolutionize how you make graphics. Near the end of our presentation, we will make a professional graphic in real time. And please note that all the graphics in this presentation, everything you see, was made using the process I'm sharing and the tools I'm sharing. Everything was made. Everything was streamlined that way. So let's get started. Alrighty. When we are creating graphics, successful graphics, there are two key components. Neither of them can be ignored. The first piece of the puzzle is concepting. Concepting is turning words or ideas into clear, compelling visual concepts. And then second, of course, is rendering those graphics or making those graphics. If we combine those two and do it the right way, the way I'm about ready to share with you, we will have a successful graphic. We do not need to have formal training as long as we use the process I'm sharing and the tools I'm sharing. So the first thing we want to talk about, of course, is concepting. This is the first step in creating a successful graphic. Heck, it's the first step in creating anything, especially a good presentation. So when it comes to concepting, there are a few pieces that need to be addressed in order to come up with a successful visual concept. The very first thing we want to know is what I call the primary objective. Now, the primary objective is the purpose of your graphic. It is the reason for which the graphic was created. It should be no longer than a sentence. One of the questions that we received earlier was how to get the board of directors riveted to the screen. Well, the secret is to make sure that that primary objective is focused on something they care about. The secret to making sure that your audience stays riveted is to do the following things: the P, the A, the Q, and the S. First is the primary objective, and I'll walk you through the others. So let's take a look. The primary objective of this particular graphic was to show that we have a formal staffing plan. That was it. Very succinct and to the point. Now let's take a look at if someone ignored connecting the graphics to the concept. If you read the bottom of your screen, you notice that the primary objective is to increase market saturation by combining iSystem software and eMarks marketing tools. Brilliant. That is a fantastic primary objective. The issue comes in when we look at the graphic associated with it. The graphic is attractive, aesthetically appealing, but unfortunately it does not communicate that primary objective. If you look at the graphic, there's nothing about that goal, that benefit, increased market saturation. That benefit is missing. I don't see one word about iSystem software or eMarks marketing tools. That leads me to the next step of how to get my board of directors riveted to the screen, how to get my audience excited about the information. And that is A, audience. Know our audience. It is all about our audience. If our goal is to persuade, motivate, or influence our audience, that's very different than simply inform our audience. If our goal is to persuade, motivate, or influence our audience, our primary objective should have a benefit. So, for example, the staffing plan is not really a benefit unto itself. However, if we say that we will reduce staffing costs by 23% using our staffing plan, now we have a built-in benefit. This gets the board of directors, this gets the audience excited, because I don't care about a solution, I don't care about information unless there is an associated benefit. Why will I benefit? In this world where information is flying at us 1,000 miles an hour, we're being inundated with tons of information, we need to get to the point and give people a reason to care. So if we look at these two slides, which approach do you think would appeal more to the United States Army? I'm guessing you'd agree that slide A. Why? Because our audience wants to see themselves reflected in our presentations, in our graphics, in our marketing, in our white papers, in everything. If our goal is to motivate or persuade, which most of the time it is. If it's simply to inform, then we can cut out a lot of the aesthetic embellishment and things of that nature, but we still want to keep people's attention, so color plays a major role. If, for example, we were presenting to an internal group, let's say we just hired new people for the Hendelberg company, which these slides were made for, then slide B would probably be a better choice because it's all about our audience. I cannot stress that enough. And it's the benefit to the audience if our goal is to motivate, persuade, or influence. The next step, this is a very, very valuable step. This is where the magic happens because the first thing we need to know is our primary objective, a one sentence or less summation of what we're trying to communicate. We have to know our audience. For example, the graphic or slide that I would show to the Boy Scouts or to Tata, a company in India, a giant company in India, is different than I would show to the U.S. Army or to Home Depot, for example. So the questions are the questions that need to be answered to achieve the primary objective. I know that may sound a little confusing, so let me give you a scenario. Imagine you walk into a networking event and you see somebody that you really, really want to sell your product to or share information about your product with. You walk over to this person and then you state the primary objective. For example, we can save you 50% with our new XYZ solution. So put yourself in the audience's shoes. If someone walked up to you and said, "We can save you 50% with the XYZ solution," what might you ask? Well, I'm guessing you would probably, after you said, "Who are you? Get away from my limo," you'd probably say, "Well, what is your XYZ solution? I'm not familiar with your XYZ solution. Can you explain it to me?" And then the only other question I suspect you'd ask is, "Well, how? How will your solution save me 50%? If we can answer those questions, then we have a very, very successful graphic. It is all about our audience. Once again, how do we get our board of directors riveted to the screen? How do we get our audience excited? We use the PAQS process, primary objective, audience, questions, and now let's move on to the S. So what does the S mean? Well, we have to answer the question succinctly and logically. So for example, if someone said, "What is your XYZ solution?" we need to answer it. We can't say, "I don't know." That would be bad. So we have to have some subject matter expertise. We can either ask someone that knows the answers, or we may learn the answers. And we would share that in our graphic.
You know, Mike, this seems like a perfect segue to go in and ask a couple of questions that we're getting from our audience. Let's do that. Noelle is asking, should you use the same background throughout a PowerPoint presentation?
The answer is usually yes, but it depends on the goal of the presentation and the content. You're going to see that my presentation changes the background. For example, if the goal of your presentation is to market or brand your company or your solution or your university or your organization, then we would probably want to make sure that the logo or the brand is front and center. The colors and everything is consistent. Number two is the content could drive the decision. And with my presentation, the content is driving me to change the background because I don't want people to be intimidated or think that there's only one solution for a dark background, not a white background, etc. So content drives that decision. The answer is usually yes, but with very specific reasons to deviate.
That's a great answer. Jackie Gregory from Fifth Third Bank is asking, what are your thoughts on transition slides? For example, as she moves from one topic to another on an agenda, is it appropriate or meaningful to have a slide that is just a title in the middle of the page introducing the next section?
Yes, it is. And because a presentation is a lot to take in, and there's something called chunking, which is a phenomenon that allows us to take in bite-sized bits of information. So by putting a divider slide in there, we're chunking the information into bite-sized chunks. Even better, Jackie, would be to make an overarching graphic and then use that graphic as a divider slide so that we can pinpoint the piece of the section that I'm talking to in the graphic. So the graphic shows you an overview of our solution, of our topic, of our messages, and then let's say we're talking about the HR component. Then I would highlight the HR component and then the slides after that. So we reorient ourselves every time we see a divider slide to the big picture.
Terrific. Let me turn it back to you, and we'll let you continue.
All righty. Thank you. So once we find out what the answers are to the questions, we apply the PAQS. So the next step is to sketch it. Now, I cannot impress upon you enough. You do not need to be Michelangelo or Picasso to sketch an idea. It doesn't matter if it looks like you drew it with your feet. The goal is to make sure that the person you're communicating your concept to understands what the heck you're talking about and the information that's going to be in your graphic. Let me show you what I mean. Oh, I forgot. One of the cool tools that I'm going to share with you is a graphic cheat sheet. This thing is amazing. It will certainly change the way you make graphics. If you go to the URL at the top of the screen, you can download a PDF of it. You can print it out at any size that you want. I recommend you go a little bigger because there's a lot of data there. And here's how it works. You download it. Every single graphic you will ever make is going to fit into one of the categories on the left side of the graphic cheat sheet, be it hierarchy, process or flow, comparison, synergy, or relationship. So let's take a look at relationships. So we wouldn't need to communicate information with relationship at its core. So if the information is simple, we would use the yellow column, or may use the yellow column graphic types. If the information is complex, we would use the orange column graphic types. And if it's quantitative, amount, value, or time, we would choose from one of the blue graphic types in the blue column. Then there's a website you can go to see thousands of examples of these graphics. Wonderful, wonderful tool. I don't leave home without it. It helps me decide between different graphic types to communicate exactly the same thing. For example, cognitively, both of these graphics communicate the same information. But emotionally or viscerally, we get a very different read from these graphics. One is literally depicting the process, and the other is assembling a process or chunking a process using a flow chart or a process diagram. The graphic cheat sheet will help you choose which one may work, and you can flip-flop. Let's say someone says, wow, I'm so sick of process diagrams. Well, we may want to use the graphic to the left. By the way, guys, remember I said everything was created using the tools? All of these graphics that you're seeing, you can make, and I'm going to show you how. All of these graphics. All right, so let's apply what we just learned. So here we have a primary objective. Now, the primary objective is pretty clear. Please read it. Our audience, I'm saying the U.S. government, not because I'm picking on the government folks out there. No, what I'm saying is that most people know who the U.S. government is. I could have easily said Dell or something like that, a company that's widely known. And then these are the questions. How quickly can you staff, where you recruit your staff, etc. So here is what, now I give training, and here is what the person sketched when they wrote down their PAQs. Now, remember I said it doesn't have to look like you're a Picasso, Michelangelo. This person has no design training whatsoever, no design training, and they just sketched it out. They used the graphic cheat sheet to come up with a graphic that communicates time. So the next step is to validate that sketch. So the secret in validating the sketch is to imagine that the sketch is the person that you walked up to at the networking event. So for example, we would ask the graphic the same questions that would have been asked of us. So the first question, if you remember, was how quickly can you staff? Asking the graphic responds within 4 days. The next question is where do you recruit your staff? The graphic answers, the internet, staffing firms, employee referrals, and job fairs. Brilliant. Perfect. The next question is how do you qualify staff? Well, we qualify it by checking for clearances, verify employment, performance assessments, background checks, and verify that they're the best candidate in a one-on-one or group and one interview. Brilliant. The next question is the staff cleared? The answer is yeah, we check for clearances. If they're not clear, we don't send them forward. Okay. And lastly, do you train your staff? Yes, we train them as needed. If it's a lateral move, there's no reason to train them. We're not going to waste your money training them. We can talk about that piece later. So therefore, we have just validated the graphic. Once we validate the sketch or mock-up, now you don't have to sketch it on a piece of paper. You can mock it up in PowerPoint, Keynote, Prezi, anything that you want. So once we validate it, then we render it, not before. That is going to save you a lot of time and money, because if you're not a designer, my guess is your full-time job isn't to make visually appealing, influential, persuasive slides. You have a lot of other things on your plate. So the goal is to make it fast and efficient. This is the secret. The PAQS, sketch, validate, make approach is the secret to doing things quickly and making sure that your graphics are as effective and powerful as possible. Because it doesn't matter if the graphic is pretty. If it doesn't communicate the right information to the target audience, we will fail. We will not have a successful graphic. Alrighty. So that is concepting. We've successfully covered concepting at a very high level. There's a lot more to it, but hey, we've got an hour. We want to make sure we move on to rendering. So with that in mind, let's move on to rendering. Rendering is the act of making the graphic. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch a quick poll because I'm curious to find out what people think here. Let's move on to the poll. Here we go. I'm going to launch this poll. If everyone could take their best guess. Let's see how wise you are. Wow. So far, I know what's in the lead. I don't want to sway the vote. We have 72% voted, 75% voted. We're almost there. I'm going to close the poll in about 5 seconds. Please vote. Please vote. Every vote counts, everyone. Every vote counts. All righty. I'm about ready to close the poll. Here we go. Closing the poll. I'm going to share the results. All right. Most people thought the graphics communicate up to 6,000 times faster than text alone. I'm going to blow your mind. Graphics actually, according to a study done by 3M, graphics communicate up to 60,000 times faster than text alone. If you don't believe me, here's a scenario. If someone were to ask you, hey, what's a circle? Think about the time that it would take you to give the textual definition. For example, you would say, well, a circle is a curved line with every point equidistant to the center. Versus, oh, let me draw a circle for you. According to the research, visuals, good visuals, communicate up to 60,000 times faster than text alone. Now, I'm not saying graphics are better than text or text is better than graphics. What I'm saying is you put them together and you have a very powerful combination. Remember, our audience is just like you. They are tired. They are hungry. They're thinking, did I let the dog out? Is the dog going to pee on the carpet? Is my daughter going to get a third nose ring? They're not thinking how amazing and incredible our presentations are. So it is our goal to communicate as efficiently and effectively and as powerfully and profoundly as possible, and graphics are the way to do that. All right, let's move forward. So when it comes to rendering, there are 3 aspects that we want to be very aware of. Number 1 is the software that we'll be using. Number 2 are the tools that I'm about ready to share with you that will revolutionize how you make graphics. And number 3 is some basic design principles. Only the basics. So let's talk about software. We want to have a basic understanding of the software we are using to create our presentations or our graphics. Based on the earlier poll, PowerPoint is the most ubiquitous tool, and it is the most used tool. Everything that I'm going to share with you can be ported into Keynote or other software. But knowing that PowerPoint is, I'm going to pick on the PowerPoint folks a little bit. So for example, in PowerPoint, there are some amazing tools built into the application to make procedural graphics, and I recommend using those. For example, there are Boolean functions which allow you to combine or subtract shapes to make interesting objects. Google and Bing and other search engines, they're your friend. They will help you figure out some of the basic tools within the software. Very, very powerful tools. So if I were trying to figure out how to make a shape, I would literally write or type how to make a shape in my search engine, and you would be amazed at the information that's available for free. Alternatively, spend a few bucks and go to lynda.com. What a wonderful website for downloading fast and easy-to-use tutorials for software. All I'm asking you to do is learn the basics of the software, because if we don't know how to add text, change color, copy and paste, or even distribute elements on a page, we would have a challenging time creating a graphic. And I'm going to show you, when I create the graphic real time, how to use some of those tools. For example, PowerPoint has just added, well, not recently, but not too long ago, added something that's very similar to layers. For all those folks out there that use Adobe Suite, the layers function in the Adobe Creative Suite is an amazing tool that I couldn't live without. Well, PowerPoint has something similar, and they call it the selection pane. And it allows me to see the quote-unquote layers of my PowerPoint slide. Very effective tool. Keynote, for example, has a bunch of procedural quantitative graphics that look fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. I recommend using them. Once again, all the graphics that you're seeing, you don't need any graphic design experience to do. So the next step is to know the tools that are out there that you can use to create graphics fast. Picasso said, good artists copy and great artists steal. Picasso did not mean to plagiarize. No, 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 no. What Picasso meant was that we should find an idea that works and then tailor it or edit it to make it our own, to make it clear and compelling and audience-centric, audience-focused. So here's the next handout. If you go to the URL at the top of the screen, www.billiondollargraphics.com/top12.pdf, you can download my top 12 favorite tools, low-cost and free tools for developing amazing graphics in PowerPoint, Keynote, Prezi, SlideRocket, just about any tool you can think of. Now, one of the questions we heard earlier, a few people asked, what are the best resources to find, for example, photographs? Well, I'm listing my favorites on the top 12. As a matter of fact, 99% of the graphics that are in this PowerPoint presentation were made with two tools. Number one was Get My Graphics, and number two was iStock Photo. 99% was made with these two tools. Pretty impressive. So let me give an example. So if we were to look at graphics from Get My Graphic, which is a tool that has, PowerPoint native graphics that are 100% editable, but can be brought into Keynote or any other tool, we'll see that they are pretty amazing, and they take almost no time and cost almost no money. So let's take a look. So here we have a graphic, a very attractive graphic, and we can customize it to whatever we want. Everything in this graphic is editable. Everything. I can move elements around. It has a transparent background. I can change any aspect, any color, because most of the graphics are vector, and I'll get into the difference between vector and raster in a moment because it's one of the basic design principles you really want to know. Let's take a look at a few more and see how powerful these tools are. So let's take a look at this. Here we have a quantitative graphic. So if we click on it and choose Edit Data, it will launch Excel. What I'd like you to do is watch the pie chart to the left as I change this information. The quantitative chart changes thanks to Excel because it is a data-driven graphic. So for example, if you go to a site like Get My Graphic and you check to make sure that it's a data-driven graphic, you can modify it in Excel. Also, because the graphic elements are vector, I can change any aspect of them. So notice I've chosen this area on the map, and now I'm simply going to change the color to anything that I want. I can animate, move things around, change it back. One of the questions we had earlier was about animation. This is a great tool for animating. So we can animate the gauge graphics moving about. If we were to create a pyramid graphic and we only need a few tiers, we would simply ungroup the graphic, delete the tiers that we don't need, regroup the graphic, and this is where I said basic understanding. A basic understanding of the software is required. So I have to know how to group and ungroup elements to make it easy. Anybody can do it, but to make it easy, I want to be able to group and ungroup. And then if I want my font size to increase, I simply choose my increase font size button up here. And if I want to get rid of some of the segments at the bottom, I would be able to click on the element, delete, 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 and then we can remove the unwanted text boxes. And now we have a 3-segment at the base with 6 going up. And we can change it to whatever we want because everything is completely editable. We can change the colors, we can change the size, we can change everything. Use it to get ideas. Like I said, Picasso said, good artists copy, great artists steal. This is a great place to see what can and can't be done. And this is all PowerPoint native, or it can be brought into any software. Use it to find new ways of showing information. Neat ways to show organizational structure. What about a funnel graphic? Holy mackerel, how many times have we needed to show synthesis, and a funnel might be the best visual metaphor. So we can show it and modify it and make it anything that we want. And do know that everything is grouped logically in these tools, so when we ungroup them, they do what we expect them to do. Whoops, it would help if I knew how to ungroup. When we click on it and we ungroup, notice if I want to pull out a piece of the pie, it pulls out. Makes sense. It's logical. We can modify anything any way you want. Click on it, move it, change it, as needed. No design skills needed. Oops. Yep, no design skills needed. It just works. Different ways of showing some pretty complex information. For those folks out there that do proposals, spiral development, boy, that's a challenging thing to show. Show that it's an iterative process over time. How might we show that? Or to show the synthesis of multiple elements coming together to form a new user interface for those IT folks out there. How might we show that? Get my graphic, I was able to come up with some ideas I couldn't have normally come up with, thinking outside the box. What about an iceberg metaphor? And we can change it. We can get rid of the background if we don't want it. Move things around. Pie charts and looping graphics. Very complex graphics that I wouldn't want to have to make. Graphics that help us get unstuck, so to speak. Different ways of showing the same thing. Once again, it's all editable. And usually the slides will come with a description of how to use the slide if it might need a description. But usually there's no description or tutorial or tips necessary. It's very intuitive as long as you know how to group and ungroup, change colors, and change text. Copy, paste, you can do anything. Remember that graphic I showed you earlier? Well, check it out. Everything is editable. I can change every aspect of this graphic. I can get rid of pieces, and because it's vector, I can scale it up, and everything holds together. And I can change text to whatever I want. And you can create your own road graphics. I think you get the point. A great tool, my two favorites to get things done. iStock Photo and Get My Graphic are my favorite. Now, let's go back to the presentation. Alrighty. So, now that we know we have to know the basics of the software, we have to know the tools, we have to have some basic understanding of Design 101. Real basic, and here it is. We have to remember, or we really want to remember, the rule KISS. Keep it simple, silly. Number 2, we want to keep things clean. We want to use a grid, meaning that I want to structure things so it's equidistant, typically, not always, but typically equidistant and at 90-degree angles. Because if we have curved lines flowing everywhere and everything at a different angle, the graphic begins to look unprofessional, disorganized, or I should say lacking order, without order. And a graphic that shows order says subconsciously that the graphic and the solution or the information associated is ordered, organized, repeatable, structured, architected. We want to show that unless we want to talk about how something is very poorly done. Vector versus raster, we'll talk about that briefly in a minute. And of course, color and reuse. Now reuse is a brilliant solution or strategy. What I mean is create a library of graphic elements. As you download these graphics from the tools I shared with you, create a library. Alternatively, go to Google Images or Bing Images and look up graphic ideas. don't take those graphics because you are probably breaking copyright law if you do. According to the laws, copyright laws in most countries, if you take something from the internet without them granting permissions or rights of reuse, then you are breaking the law. Now, that does not apply to certain things like education, news, things of that nature, parody, but know the reason that you are using it, and know that if you take it off the internet, rights of use has to be granted unless it's being used for something like fair use, legally speaking. Alrighty, so let's take a look at a graphic I downloaded from Get My Graphic. Let's make it real time. So the first thing we want to do, oops, not ready for that yet. I jumped ahead. So the first thing we want to do is keep it simple, silly. What are the elements that make up this graphic? So if I look, I see a box, square. It's just a square. I see a circle, and I see an oval, or a tongue depressor shaped, or a curved, rounded square. So then I would simply begin by creating those shapes. So I would insert a shape. Once again, know the basics of the tools you are using. I would insert my curved, rounded rectangle, click on that rectangle, and notice I have little nodes or diamonds on the end. Then I would round out that shape so that now I have that conveyor belt shape done. Once I do that, I can colorize the shape. To colorize it, I would simply click on the Format tab in PowerPoint, for example, choose Shape Fill, and then I would choose the colors that I want to fill it, and then I would give it a stroke, an outline, and I would give it weight. So I've created the belt and the hollow within the conveyor belt, the space in between the belt. The next step is to create the wheels. To do that, I would simply create a circle and then fill it with a gradient. So we would choose Shape Fill under the Format tab in PowerPoint. In Keynote, it would be different. In Prezi, it would be different. Then I would create my gradient. Once I create that gradient, what I would then do is create different shapes, slightly smaller versions of the same shape, but change the gradient direction. To change the gradient direction, I would simply choose the different directions for the gradient right here, or I could change it in this section right here, this dialog box for Format Shape. Once again, learn the basics of the tool, and you can do anything. This is as complex as it gets, guys. This is it. So watch what happens when I combine these. When I choose to align, distribute vertically, align, not distribute vertically, align center, now we have what looks like a wheel. Because the gradient is going two different directions, it tricks the eye into thinking there's three-dimensional space. So then I would choose the wheel, I would go into my belt, and I would paste it. Once I paste it, all I do then is duplicate it multiple times, many times as I feel is necessary, and then check this tool out. So I have my wheels selected, only my wheels. So now I go back to Arrange, Align, Distribute horizontally. Boom. Now everything is evenly distributed within my conveyor belt graphic. The next step would be to add the lines. Once again, very, very easy. I click on the Insert tab, choose Shapes, and then choose Line, and then draw my lines. That's it. And then I would add my text. Same story, Insert, Text box, and then I have my text box. That's it. Nothing special, not challenging at all. The next step, or I could, of course, put the text directly on the wheels, which is what I'm going to do because I want to save space. The next step is to create the arrows. So once again, I go to Insert, Shapes, insert my arrow, and I created an arrow there. Once I do that, I want to give it a cool effect. So we're going to go back to the gradient effects that we created, clicking on this little, check this out, this little puppy right here, little format shape, click on that, and notice I have a gradient already there. If it wasn't, then it would be a solid fill. So I've got a gradient fill, and I'm going to change those colors. So here's node 1, or I should say gradient stop 1 and gradient stop 2. So gradient stop 1, I'm going to change the transparency to 100%. Gradient stop 2, I'm going to change the color to gray. That's it. Once I do that, then I'm going to duplicate the shape as many times as I need, and then distribute them. And then once again, select all, arrange, align, distribute horizontally. That's it. That's as hard as it gets. Copy and paste that into this graphic, into my conveyor belt, and then I would create boxes. Once again, it's very simple. Insert, shape, box, draw my box, and then change the color to whatever I want. Now here's something cool. If you select your elements and group them, and then we're going to give it a 3D effect. So if I go to Format tab, Shape Effects, 3D Rotation, look at that puppy. So now, make sure you always apply the same perspective or the same 3D rotation to all the elements. So I'm going to apply this here, and I'm going to go back into my Format tab and choose 3D Format, Depth. This is extrusion in the Z-axis. For those that get that, cool. If you don't, it doesn't matter. Watch what happens. So I'm going to change the depth to 300. And now we have a cool looking conveyor belt. I do the same with these. I group these, group, and then once again, I choose the same, bring the front. I choose the same 3D rotation option, and then I, of course, change the depth. Something like 200. We have our boxes, and we would do the same for this. And now we have something that looks like this, which is a very cool graphic that took only a basic understanding of the software to figure out, or a little bit of time spent listening or watching the tutorial. Alternatively, we could have gone to one of those websites and downloaded the graphic and modified it as needed. Either one worked. So I did mention something about vector versus raster. And by the way, folks, notice the use of a grid on this graphic. Everything is adhering to a grid. Now, I did mention vector versus raster. What do I mean by that? Well, there's two types of graphics in the design world. There's vector, which is typically known as clip art. Now, clip art nowadays does not look like clip art of yesteryear. Notice, you'll know when it's a good-looking piece of artwork, but if it's vector, that means you can scale it to any size. So let's take a look at this. Here's the computer I downloaded from Get My Graphic that's vector. Look at this. I can scale it to any size, and it still looks good. Now, here's an icon that I downloaded that is not vector, and watch what happens when I blow it up. It starts to get blurry. That means it's resolution dependent. There are graphics at higher resolution out there. Choose the right resolution for your needs. I recommend, for most PowerPoint presentations, 200 dpi because it looks fabulous in print, it looks great on the screen, and it doesn't bloat file size. And if it's vector, look how easy it is to modify. If I want to get rid of that highlight, I can click on it and remove the highlight. If I want to change the color of the screen, I can simply click on the color of the screen and change it to whatever I want because it's vector. Changing this would require additional effort using a tool like Adobe Photoshop. So vector is your friend. Basic color theory. When we're choosing colors, just know that there are colors that work better than others. If we want something to be jarring and very energetic, we would use colors that are across from one another on the color wheel. They typically vibrate when they're right next to one another. Think violet and yellow, red and green. They're across from one another on the color wheel. They typically are difficult to look at, but are great for sports teams. However, that's called complementary colors. If we go with what's called analogous colors, colors that are right next to one another on the color wheel, we find good things happening. They're a little more harmonious. For example, yellow, green and blue, or red, orange, and yellow. They tend to work better together. There are some tricks and tips for choosing the right color. If someone wants to ask me, I'm happy to share the 3 choices when choosing your color palette. There's only 3 choices I'd recommend in most situations. Whoops. Do know that color equals emotion, and know your audience. For example, red is the color of mourning in some countries in South Africa, but here in Western cultures, or in many Western cultures, not here, it could be elsewhere, it means a lot of different things. Also, for example, red is, or warm colors are considered more appetizing than cool colors. For example, would you rather eat the cherry pie or the booger pie? I suspect you'd rather eat the cherry pie. Know your audience and know what color equals what emotion. It's all dependent upon your content and your audience. There are some fantastic websites out there. These are my top 4 websites for choosing color or making color palettes. Cooler from Adobe, Color Screen Designer, Color Explorer, and Color, I'm getting cut off here, colorlovers.com. I love them. I think they're fantastic, and I recommend you use them and find which one of those 4 work best for you. I use each one for different reasons. So that's, we already talked about concepting, and that's rendering. Those 2 pieces of the puzzle come together. The last but definitely not least, here's the 3rd checklist. If you go to that URL at the top of your screen, download this checklist, you'll be able to validate whether you have a successful graphic early in the process or at the end of the process, because everything is made up of the concept and the rendering, the content and the aesthetics. They're a marriage made in heaven. Having one without the other equals an unsuccessful graphic. Not a good thing. I know Sharon mentioned the fact that I've got some books out there. Here's the newest book. If you're interested, check it out. We also do training. Happy to do it. And if you want the best or one of the best graphic design companies in the universe, this is the company that I would recommend. Now, it's time for Q&A, and what I'm going to do is put up the 3 tools that I'm sharing out on the last page so that you'll have them, because it might have been a lot to write down while I was talking.
How do you decide which colors work together? What are the 3 color combinations you're recommending?
Absolutely. Well, the choices that I typically make is if my goal is to persuade, motivate, influence, I use my target audience's colors. So let's say I'm presenting to Home Depot, for example, then I would use Home Depot colors. If I was presenting to the United States Army, I would use the United States Army's colors. Familiarity breeds trust. So if we see something that's familiar, we begin to intrinsically, subconsciously at times, begin to trust it. So number 1 is if my goal is to motivate or persuade or influence, I prefer to use my audience's colors. Number 2 is if my goal is to brand my organization, my company, my product, my solution, myself, then I would use my colors. So for example, if I were, I'm picking on poor Home Depot. If I were Home Depot and I was presenting to someone else and I wanted to brand Home Depot, I would use my colors because I want you to remember me. And number 3 is in most Western cultures, there's something known as the blue phenomenon. What they found is, and they really don't know why, they speculate, but they can't empirically prove it. Blue, and to a lesser extent green, are considered the safest, most visually appealing colors. So if we want to play it safe, we would go with blues and then secondary green. Now I know a lot of presentations use them, and there's a reason why they use them, and that's because they calm people down. The emotional response is exactly what most people want, and that is blue is associated with trust and things of that nature. So number 1, if your goal is to motivate or persuade, use the audience's colors. If your goal is to brand yourself, use your colors. And then if your goal is to play it safe, use blues or greens.
So what about a dark background with, with white text? Is that something, it looks like you're using that, is that something you would recommend?
I really don't have a preference. They did do an experiment that found that dark backgrounds with light text are the easiest to read for small quantities of text. It's a little easier on the eyes. Specifically, they found that dark colors with the color yellow, which I'm not a fan of, is the best way to go. So it really won't, in my experience, it really won't impact the end result. I would focus more on your color palette being the driving force, your content being the driving force. Legibility is important, but as long as the font isn't too small or some wacky font, you should be good to go.
I mean, Carol brings up a really good point about that. The fact that, you've got the dark background with the white text is great for when you're projecting something, but when you turn around and need to do reprints on paper, you kind of lose some of that excitement in the slides. You can go grayscale or black and white, but it doesn't really look that good. Any ideas for how to do that?
Yeah, for the reason that you just mentioned, I typically have all of my printed slides, all the slides that I know will be printed, I have them set up to be black text or dark text on a white or light background because I don't want to use a lot of toner. I don't want to waste a lot of toner. There is a way to set it up so that the print slides are different, the note slides are print differently, but I think the safest way to go, if that's your concern, is to simply have a light background with dark text. Far safer and easier and less likely to cause a problem in the end.
We've had a lot of questions about what version of PowerPoint you're using, both on the Mac and the PC.
Yes, I'm actually running Windows operating system on my Macintosh right now, and I'm using on both platforms the two newest versions of the PowerPoint software. So on the PC, for example, right now I'm using 2010. 2013, I believe, is out. I met with the Microsoft developers. They are amazing people, and 2013 is a fabulous tool. I'm also using 2007. For example, the tools I shared with you usually work from 07 and forward. On the Mac side, it's the two newest. I can't remember off the top of my head. I believe it's 2010 and 2007 or 2008. I'm not sure what the numbers are, but they're the two newest.
Mickey is offering just something for everyone else. HTTP colors schemedesigner.com is a great free tool for designing color schemes. Do you recommend any others?
I read as well, and it's a fabulous tool. The color tools, the free online color tools that I recommend are shown on the screen right now.
Thank you for going back to them. So what's the best choice for text?
As far as text is concerned, I recommend if you're using Keynote or Prezi or anything like that, I recommend that you use a ubiquitous font. What I mean by that is I want a font that's not going to be substituted. Now, in the newest presentation software, just about everything, you can embed the font, which is incredible and a great way to do it. Now, it does increase file size, and it does increase the likelihood, although remote, that the file may blow up. So what I recommend is using a ubiquitous font. And there are only two fonts that are installed on almost every machine in the world. And if you're like me, I'm about sick of seeing them. But it is what it is. The two fonts that are on almost everybody's machine is Times and Arial. The font that I've used today is Arial because I know that there was a scripty font that I wouldn't recommend using, but since I'm controlling the presentation, it's not an issue. So for that reason, I'd recommend using Arial or something, or Times. Now, I also found that for short quantities of text, and this is research done by smart people, not me, a sans serif font, a font without the little caps on the end, tends to work better for small quantities of text, like bullets, graphics, things of that nature. For large quantities of text, it seems that a serif font would work. Now, on-screen versus printed, that's a slightly different argument, and we could be here for about a half an hour talking about those issues.
Let's go back. I want to go back to the conveyor belt. Lee has a question. The lines going down, how did you make sure that those are straight and not on an angle?
How do we make sure that the lines are straight and not on an angle? Now, in most graphics packages, holding down the Shift key constrains things to a vertical, to a 90-degree angle. What I have found in PowerPoint, and I'm sure someone has a better solution than I am, what I have found in PowerPoint is practice makes perfect. What a horrible answer, but that's what I found after doing it for so long. Or I take a line and this is a cheating step, I take two squares and I use a connecting line.
I think that also brings up a whole area around graphics. How many is too many, and how do you really, when does it get too gimmicky, and how do you strike that balance between text and graphics?
Well, there's only two reasons I'm ever going to use a graphic, excluding the emotional reasons. If my information is too complex to be communicated textually, think, for example, of an organizational chart. Imagine trying to explain your organizational chart to someone textually. Therefore, it sounds like a need for a graphic. Number two is if it's a critical success factor, meaning that if my audience doesn't understand the information, I'm probably going to fail at my mission. So if my board of directors needs to see some information that's very, very important to them, I'm going to turn that into a graphic, because that graphic, according to research, is more profoundly understood and is much more likely to be paid attention to and be remembered. So those are the only two reasons I use a graphic. If the information is too complex to be communicated textually, and or it's a critical success factor. Other than that, I'll typically use text.
I think that's a good point. I think the question is, really making sure that you give the information, whether it be a visual or visual and text or text alone. You have to understand your audience, as you said. So I think that's really terrific. So how many times should a logo be present in a presentation?
Well, if the goal is to brand, as many times as possible, but do it subtly. The last thing we want to see is something shoved down our throat. So if you notice in my slide, it was almost like an afterthought, oh, by the way. And we do pick up on those things, but if everywhere you look, it was my company's name, which I'm not even going to say because my goal is not to shove it down people's throats. If our goal is to brand ourselves, if we push too hard, the presentation comes across as being too salesy. And that is the last thing our audience wants, even in a sales presentation, is for us to stand up there and extol the virtues of our company. Because, quite frankly, I don't care about the presentation, the content of the presentation, the organization presenting it, or the presenter if there's no benefit to me. So the presentation should be focused on me, or it should be focused on the audience, me being the audience in this scenario, not on the presenter, but to brand the company is a wise thing. And you're going to do that through colors, fonts, and the logo being subtly present on as many slides as it makes sense.
So we have a couple, we're getting short on time, so I have two more questions. Do you recommend creating graphics in the presentation tool as opposed to like Photoshop or Illustrator? Is there a hard rule about that? But some of the 3D stuff looks like it might be cleaner in PowerPoint.
Here's the rule. If you're more comfortable in the Adobe suite, then use the Adobe suite. If you're not, then use the tool that you're most comfortable with. Obviously, a graphic designer with years of experience is going to do things faster and better in the tool of their choice than if they would use, let's say, PowerPoint. However, most of the people out there aren't graphic designers. And the Adobe Suite, although it is an amazing tool, has a steep learning curve, and it's very pricey. So I create using the tool that my customer needs to edit the graphics. That's another consideration. So if my customer needs ultimate editability, they need to be able to change every aspect of it, I'll either create the graphics in PowerPoint or Keynote or Prezi or SlideRocket or whatever is needed, and then I'll augment that by going to a website like Get My Graphic and bringing in the more challenging graphics that were probably created outside of PowerPoint anyway and brought in as PowerPoint native files.
Great. I'm going to say we have two more questions because we had an interesting one pop up while we were doing this. When are animations beneficial?
Once again, I only use animation. I call most animations dancing baloney because it adds no value to the content, to the message, to the story, to the explanation. So animations should only be used as it's relevant to the explanation. I would once again apply the PAQS function or methodology to that. If there's no reason to have an animation, if it's simply there for the ooh-ah factor, it's not really worth it. It's a lot of work for a very little return, and my guess is most of the people in our audience are not designers. You would spend a lot of time making, for example, a gear rotate, but what would be the point? If the concept or the visual metaphor of the gear communicates the information, having it rotate is what I would call dancing baloney. So let the content or the message drive the necessity, the need to animate something.
So dancing baloney, I guess that's a new business term. I'll have to keep that one in mind. So Mike, if somebody takes inspiration from a graphic on one of the billion-dollar graphics and recreates it using the shapes techniques you've demonstrated, Jocelyn wants to know, what's the rule on copyright?
There's no copyright issues right there because you're using it as inspiration. The rule of thumb, according to the attorneys that I've spoken with, there used to be an old rule of thumb for designers. They said that, and this is wrong, by the way, 100% wrong. If the graphic is changed at least by 10% or more, it is no longer protected under copyright. That is not true. Here's the rule that lawyers use. If the graphic is recognized by the artist, then they can sue. So essentially, if you remember, there was in the States, there was a huge marketing campaign for Obama. And it was illustrated in a very specific way. Well, someone else took that style of illustration and applied it to something else, and the artist sued them and won. So essentially, if the artist can recognize that work as being theirs, they can sue. Now, being inspired by something, finding something on a website and creating a version of it that is yours and created in the tool from scratch is usually fine. It's usually okay. Now, if you create it exactly as it was, then that would be, in fact, very, very, very dangerous, and I wouldn't recommend it because I have a friend of mine that was recently sued, or actually, she was recently sued for using a photograph that someone else had on their website. So be careful, guys. Be very, very careful. And it was innocuous. She was doing it for her child's website or her child's blog or something.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, and I think at this time is we're going to have to wrap it up. So I want to thank you, Mike. You've done a phenomenal job. I know I've learned a lot. The responses from everybody has been great. They were getting kicked out of conference rooms and had to go. But thank you so much, everyone. We're going to stop the recording at this time and end the webinar.